briefing now underway, and this one is closed to cameras. One of the issues sure to come up is a major turn in the investigations into Russia meddling in the U.S. election. The Senate now calling for a probe into Obama's Attorney General. Hello, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith. Senate leaders want information from former Attorney General Loretta Lynch and others about allegations of interference in the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now with the latest. Catherine?
Sandra, the chairman and ranking member of the powerful Senate Judiciary Committee, Senators Chuck Grassley and Dianne Feinstein, sent this letter to the former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, asking her to provide relevant documents and answer questions about media reports that she would stop the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information from going too far, and whether the assurances were known to then DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The Lynch letter reads in part, quote, "During your time in the Justice Department, did you ever have communications with Representative Wasserman Schultz, her staff, her associates, or any other current or former DNC officials about the Clinton email investigation?" During his congressional testimony June 8th, the former FBI Director James Comey said Lynch told him to use language that downplayed the criminal nature of the FBI investigation, and he referred to the Lynch document that was reportedly picked up by Russian hackers.
There were other things that contributed to that. One significant item I know the committee's been briefed on. There's been some public accounts of it, which are nonsense, but I understand the committee's been briefed on the classified facts. Probably the only other consideration I guess I can talk about an open setting is that at one point the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me.
According to our Fox Research Department, in July of 2016, Lynch declined to answer questions on the Clinton email case more than 70 times during her congressional testimony. And for some context, these new Senate letters are a big deal because they show how the Russia probe has effectively spilled over into the previous administration, Sandra.
Obviously a big development in that investigation. Catherine, how is Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation?
Well, the relationship, Sandra, between Special Counsel Robert Mueller and the fired FBI Director James Comey has really been under the microscope since May, when Mueller took over the Russia investigation. This video from 2013 shows Comey when he was nominated to be FBI director, taking over from Mueller, who had held the job, for 12 years, 2 more than the traditional 10-year term, at the request of President Obama. President Trump telling Fox News this morning that he's kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude on whether Mueller should recuse himself from the Russia case.
He's very, very good friends with Comey, which is very bothersome.
The president has continued to dispute Comey's characterization of their private conversations, specifically over the former National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn. Sandra.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. So much news coming in this afternoon. Catherine Herridge, thank you for the update on all of that. The White House press briefing is now underway, but we're making it very clear there is a change happening here. There are no cameras that are allowed to shoot it. Remember, at this time, usually every day, we take that White House press briefing inside of the White House, cameras on. Well, this is the camera just pointed at the wall in the room right now. Our camera on the wall. A curious sight at the White House press briefing yesterday. The room full of reporters waiting for Sarah Sanders to come out and speak. Just as she did, the camera moved off the podium and just shot the White House seal, not the press secretary. They've changed from briefings to gaggles now, from on camera to off camera. The White House is not permitting audio use until after the briefing wraps. The White House press secretary Sean Spicer has had just 7 media appearances in 18 days since the president returned from his overseas trip. President Trump has not held a full press conference since February. Let's talk now with Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. I don't know, Chris, are we making too big of a deal out of this? I mean, this is a big change for the White House.
Well, it's important, and it is worth noting because, of course, every administration would like to be more secretive. Every administration would like to share less and be less transparent and accountable because it would be easier to get things done. But we should also remember that for most Americans, they don't care. They don't care whether it's on camera or off camera, if it's audio or video or all of that stuff. So reporters have to be careful here because, number one, for the most ardent supporters of this president, just as the most ardent supporters of the previous president, when he would beat up the press or limit access or be less accountable or be less transparent, we would scream and holler and say, this is not right, you're not doing the right things, this is unjust. The President Obama's base said, yeah, good, stick it to them, especially those guys at Fox. This time, President Trump knows that by limiting access, by not giving press conferences, by not doing these things, many of his supporters will like it because they hate the press even more than Democrats do. And as for the people in the middle, as for the voters who are trying to figure things out, when we complain about access and is it video or is it audio, it probably sounds like whining from some people who have cushier jobs than most Americans.
Well, we know that the things that this White House has said about the media from go. So there was some speculation that they were going to cancel White House press briefings entirely. I think there was even threats to do so. So the fact that the White House has only had 2 on-camera briefings in just the past 2 weeks, Chris, is it a possibility that they may move into that direction and not hold any briefings at all?
Once this administration decided that it was not really going for persuadable voters anymore, that this president was sort of going to write off those folks and go for keeping the base, his base of voters fired up and engaged, skipping through the press and what they see as distortions from the press and characterizations and this kind of reporting, and going straight to rallies, going straight to interviews with outlets that are seen as more favorable by the president's base, doing those things and just keeping those voters engaged is probably a politically smart move.
If I could jump in, Chris, I just want to show real quickly what the White House Correspondent Association is saying about this. They are saying, quote, "We believe strongly that Americans should be able to watch and listen to senior government officials face questions from an independent news media in keeping with the principles of the First Amendment and the need for transparency at the highest levels of government. We are not satisfied with the current state of play, and we will work hard to change it." Again, the treatment of this press, though, of this president, it's not even arguable that it's unprecedented, the coverage that we have seen so far. I don't know. Would you argue that, Chris?
A lot about these days is unprecedented. We're in a way unprecedented space, and that definitely includes the negative tenor of the coverage. How much of it is deserved, how much of it is gratuitous, that's up for every individual to decide. But this is the most hostile relationship between the president and the press probably since Richard Nixon left office. This is a very hostile space, and everything that this administration can do to blunt the effectiveness of reporters in casting these stories is probably seen as a good thing. They'll probably get away with it, but I would say this. Reporters have to do their jobs no matter how hard the White House makes it for them. You're going to have to just work harder. You're going to have to do these things, and you're not going to get what you got under the previous administrations, which was spoon-fed, prepackaged news. You're going to have to dig harder, and that, in the long run, could be bad news for the administration.
All right, and Chris, as I mentioned, a lot of news coming in this afternoon. A big one is that the Senate just announced this probe of Loretta Lynch's, the former Attorney General's, behavior in the 2016 election. This is big news, Chris. Tell us why.
Well, potentially this could be quite large. We'll see what the underlying facts are. We'll see what's in there. But the possibility that Loretta Lynch, who James Comey basically did everything that he could to put a blinking beacon next to her and point to potential misconduct on her part, not just the tarmac meeting, but also with Bill Clinton, but also what she told him to say about the investigation, the fact that that matched up with Democratic Party talking points. There's a lot of exposure here, and the fact that you have Dianne Feinstein and other Democrats joining in to ask these questions says that the folks from the Obama administration aren't out of the woods yet.
All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you. Good to see you.
You bet.
All right, well, the Department of Justice siding with Texas in the battle over sanctuary cities ahead of a federal judge's decision. The Justice Department filed a legal statement arguing the state's controversial SB 4 law does not violate the Constitution. Kristen Fisher explains from Washington. Kristen, what's the Attorney General saying about why his department decided to make this move now?
Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is arguing that Texas is simply following President Trump's lead, and the word he used is that Texas is doing so very admirably. In a statement of interest filed today, the Attorney General said, quote, "The Department of Justice fully supports Texas's effort and is participating in this lawsuit because of the strong federal interest in facilitating the state and local cooperation that is critical in enforcing our nation's immigration laws." So what this bill would do is it would try to force sanctuary cities to cooperate with federal immigration officials. It would also give local police the authority to ask anyone during a routine traffic stop about their immigration status. But this lawsuit, which has been joined by 4 of the state's largest cities, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio, it alleges that this law, which was signed by the governor just last month, is unconstitutional because it undermines their local authority by forcing them to carry out the agenda of the federal government. The first hearing set for Monday, Sandra.
All right, Kristen, when would this new law take effect?
Well, as of now, it's scheduled to take effect in September, though this lawsuit could clearly delay it. A federal judge could decide to put it on hold, just like the president's proposed travel ban. But President Trump is continuing to make this one of his signature issues, as indicated at that rally in Iowa just 2 nights ago.
No issue is more central to public safety than the issue of immigration and border security.
So, Sandra, expect a lot of support for Texas from the Trump administration as this lawsuit continues to make its way through the courts.
All right, Kristen Fisher, thank you. All right, well, right now, senators reading through the proposed health care bill, but without at least 2 of these 4 senators who say they will not support it. What chances does this bill have to pass? Like a scene from a Hollywood movie, a woman leads officers in Los Angeles on a 30-minute high-speed chase before stopping for a smoke. At some point, the driver came to an abrupt stop before crashing into a patrol car and injuring an officer. The chase started with officers believing she was driving a stolen car. The driver is seen casually smoking a cigarette and leaning out a car's sunroof as at least 6 officers approached with guns drawn. All right. Well, for the Senate Republican health care bill to pass, President Trump needs support from some key Republican senators. But 4 of them say the legislation does not have their vote the way it's written at this moment. But the president remains confident, saying we will get there. With more reaction from the Senate, Peter Doocy joins us from Capitol Hill. Peter, how hard is President Trump leaning on these 4 lawmakers to back the health care draft?
Sandra, right now it doesn't sound like the president is leaning on them, but he is listening to them. Sean Spicer, the press secretary, said a little while ago they've got the White House legislative team and the HHS secretary, Tom Price, working behind the scenes with the president on some technical things they can do to tweak the bill to get some more senators on board. And President Trump said in an interview that aired this morning, he thinks that they're going to get this thing across the finish line.
There are also 4 good guys and they're 4 friends of mine, and I think that they'll probably get there. We'll have to see. You know, healthcare is a very difficult situation. If you look, the Clintons tried to get it, and after years and years, they couldn't do it. Obamacare was murder for them to get, and now it's failed.
Senator Ted Cruz was handing out a piece of paper yesterday with 4 things that could make him flip from a no to a yes. Things like making it easier to buy and sell insurance across state lines. The other 3 senators who say they are no votes, Johnson, Paul, and Lee, all say they want more of Obamacare repealed. Sandra.
And, Peter, how long until we know more about how senators on the fence right now plan to vote?
Not long. We actually might get some more insight into the thinking of one of the senators who is skeptical, known to be skeptical of the bill, Nevada's Dean Heller, in just a few minutes. Heller is up for re-election this cycle, so he may have that as part of his calculation. And he also said he wanted to check with that state's Governor Sandoval about the Senate healthcare draft's impact on Nevada before really making up his mind. And the 2 of them are going to have a press conference scheduled to start about 15 minutes from right now. Of the other senators in play today, 2 of them have been saying they want this package to have more money to fund the opioid epidemic, to combat the opioid epidemic. That's West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito and Ohio Senator Rob Portman. And then 2 others have been saying they don't want this Senate package to defund Planned Parenthood, which this bill in its current form could do. That's Senator Susan Collins and Senator Lisa Murkowski. Sandra.
All right, Peter Ducey live for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you. Well, new provocation from North Korea, what it's testing this time, and why my next guest says the U.S. is on a collision course with the rogue regime. Plus, it's a battle with little margin for error for Republicans as they try to pass a health care bill in the Senate with zero Democratic support.
If there are problems getting insurance, it is because the Republican administration has sabotaged the Affordable Care Act. And so you can't sabotage the plan and then complain that insurance companies aren't going to be there.
A Fox News alert for you, a shooting at a storage facility just outside of Minneapolis. Police confirming at least 2 people have been shot before the suspect surrendered to police peacefully. Police say a handgun was recovered from the scene and 1 adult male is dead. We don't know the condition yet of the other person shot. At least 1 more protester is reported dead in Venezuela after more chaos and violence. The Interior Minister says he was shot by a military police sergeant who used an unauthorized weapon. Several others were also reportedly injured after National Guardsmen fired at them outside an airbase in Caracas. The death toll from these riots climbing to at least 76. Many Venezuelans say they are fed up with the president who is trying to change the Constitution. They also say that the food and medicine has been in short supply. North Korea reacting to the death of Otto Warmbier, the regime fiercely denying claims that it tortured or mistreated the American college student, insisting that the biggest victim in all of this is North Korea. Senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is in our London bureau. Greg, what else is North Korea saying?
Sandra, you're right. Pyongyang finally breaking its silence by the death of 22-year-old Otto Warmbier. And it's pretty much as one would expect from the regime. Frankly, pretty pathetic. Remember, the 22-year-old American college student was held for 18 months in captivity in North Korea. He was released last week in a coma with brain damage, buried yesterday. Today, a regime spokesman is quoted as saying the belief that he was abused during that captivity, well, that is, quote, groundless, that the government in fact acted in a humanitarian fashion, that the negative accounts of his captivity amounted to a smear campaign against the regime of Kim Jong-un, and that Warmbier was actually the victim of failed policies of the President Obama administration. Sandra, former President Obama's spokesman this week saying that their top effort was to try to release all the Americans held in captivity during that time.
And Greg, we're also learning that North Korea has test-fired these missile engines. What else do we know about that?
Yeah, a lot of activity, Sandra, on both sides of the DMZ actually this week. According to Fox News, there was a test firing this week of a missile which could be used in an ICBM by Pyongyang, which could be tipped with a nuclear warhead, which could reach continental United States in the next couple of years. South Korea today responding in kind, test firing a medium-range missile which would be capable of hitting targets in North Korea as well. So again, activity on both sides of the peninsula. Next week, we'll see activity in Washington, Sandra, a meeting with President Trump at the White House, the new president of South Korea. And they no doubt will be discussing ways to get out of an increasingly tense situation there around the world.
All right.
Back to you.
Greg Palcott in London for us. Thank you. Well, the White House briefing is underway, as we have mentioned, but all we get to look at is this wall. John Roberts is in the room and about to give us the latest and explain the no cameras happening right now as Russia takes Korea taking a step that may lead to a nuclear weapon. The North testing a rocket engine that U.S. officials say could lead to the development of a ballistic missile. Let's bring in General Jack Keane, retired 4-star general, former Army Vice Chief of Staff, chairman at the Institute for the Study of War, and a Fox News military analyst. General, always good to see you. So let's start first with this big news. North Korea launching this new rocket engine. And you have to remind everybody, this coming just after President Trump says China tried on North Korea, but doesn't look like it'll work out. Where does this go?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer here. But here's what I think is happening. Certainly, North Korea is rapidly and steadily marching towards weaponizing ballistic missiles and also developing an intercontinental ballistic missile, which is what this rocket test was all about today. Nothing has thwarted them from that objective, not China, not any rhetoric coming out of the United States, not a carrier strike group, etc. They are on the march towards that capability. I think where the Trump team is now is recognizing that China is not going to deliver. And they had a skepticism about that right from the beginning, certainly, as anybody would, knowing the circumstances with China and North Korea. But I think what we'll see is the Trump team coming to the point where they're going to put maximum pressure on North Korea. And by that I mean any ally of ours who is doing business with North Korea, this administration is going to try to get them to shut that down. And I think we're going to see them go after China, because most of the trade between North Korea and China and the money exchange is with China. And that means going after the banks in China that are supporting North Korea. That would be a first for the United States to ever have sanctioned China, but I think that's the path we're on.
Wow. And you think that that is the strategy that the president would want to employ?
Yes, I think, I can't speak for him, but I think when you just think through this in terms of what are the options that are left, that's what's left. And I believe this team, the team that surrounds the president, is very determined to bring this to a favorable ending. And so they're going to go after this thing with as much as they possibly can.
Okay. And General, I want to also get to Russia firing these rockets into Syria. We're learning that warships have fired 6 missiles on ISIS targets in Syria, according to state media. What's happening there?
Well, certainly Russia is in Syria for one reason: to prop up the Assad regime. And they have done that successfully along with the Iranians. They told their domestic audience, the people at home, that the reason for coming to Syria was to defeat ISIS. That was somewhat of a false narrative. So on occasion, they will deliver an assault against ISIS, very public back home. They'll show the video of all of that and give them the impression that they're fighting ISIS every single day. Not true. But nonetheless, there is some military significance to where this attack took place. It was east of the city of Homs in Hama province. And just a little further east of that, ISIS is in control of oil fields that the Syrian regime, the Iranians and the Russians, want to return to the control of the Syrian regime for obvious reasons. It's a moneymaker, and right now ISIS has that moneymaker. So this is likely in a little bit in preparation for an eventual military operation against ISIS in those oil fields.
Those heightened tensions between the U.S. and Russia, General, how would you describe that at this moment?
Well, I think we're going to do everything that we can to avoid any conflict with each other in Syria. Though certainly we're there together, we have all the instruments of war are there, and things can happen that are unintended in terms of consequence. But I don't see for a minute Russia doing anything against the United States taking action to protect its own forces on the ground. And that's what we did when we shot down that Syrian jet. And we would do that again wherever it takes place. And Russia, believe me, does not want to take on the United States directly, because if they did, we would destroy that air base. And that is a strategic asset that they have. It's a huge accomplishment that they've achieved, that they're using to leverage their influence around the Middle East, and they're going to protect it.
A huge piece of legislation signed in the East Room of the White House in the last hour, in the noon hour, I should say, Eastern Time, General, this VA Accountability Act. President Trump following it through on a campaign promise to bring change and accountability to the VA. Do you believe what he is putting in place will bring the needed change there? Yeah,
it's a big deal. You know, the bureaucracy of the VA is well known by the American people, has not been able to get rid of non-performers and people certainly that shouldn't even be a part of the organization. This is going to be able to have the VA secretary almost fire somebody immediately for cause, kind of like what would happen in the private sector when you have somebody that's a bona fide non-performer. But I'll tell you what, this VA secretary and the president, they are turning this organization around. They have made a lot of progress, and my contacts have given me some pretty positive feedbacks about wait times going down, access to doctors going up, veterans able to pick pick their own doctors. They are making some progress here. They are beginning to turn this thing to the favor of the veterans. It's probably still a ways away from it getting where they totally want it to be. But they have turned it, Sandra, and this is a good news for our vets.
And as the president said, this is one of the biggest changes to the history of the VA. Huge legislation that he signed there today. So as you point out, this allows the firing of those people that need to be firing, but it also protects whistleblowers.
Yeah,
because that was so important.
Yeah, and it is important. They've got a White House, obviously not probably right in the White House, but it's an advertised White House whistleblower line for the VA. That doesn't exist for any other agency, and certainly that likely will get used. And you can tell the attitude of the VA has changed so much because they want people to tell them what's wrong. They want to do something about it, and that's a change in culture.
And as the president said, when he was signing this legislation, he said, we owe this to our veterans. We owe everything to our veterans who put the blood, sweat, and tears into what they do to protect this country. You hope it brings the necessary change. I know that is something that is near and dear to your heart. General Keane, if I may ask you at this moment in time, as we're waiting to get feedback from the White House press briefing that was off camera today, just the status of things, I mean, morale in the military. I mean, how are things going, in your opinion, right now, as far as progress that this president is making? You are so closely watching this.
Well, the funding for the military really hasn't hit the military yet, and I think many of us are disappointed by the president's fiscal year 18 budget because it doesn't have nearly enough money in it. To be frank about it, it's just 3% above what President Obama had forecasted for FY18. And the Senate Armed Services Committee, headed by John McCain, and the House Armed Services Committee, headed by Max Thornberry, both of them together are going to try to add about $40 billion to that FY18 budget. And if that happens and that gets approved, then we're going to be moving in the right direction.
It reminds me of something I had in front of me. Former Defense Secretary Bob Gates once saying the VA's healthcare costs are eating the Defense Department alive. And I thought that was important to get in there as we did talk about the change that is being brought about for our veterans and for the VA on this day.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, healthcare costs are rising, in the private sector for every American, and they're certainly no different inside the United States military and inside the VA. Healthcare is expensive no matter who is administering it, and those costs are rising every single year. In the Defense Department, the personnel costs to include paying our troops, taking care of healthcare, taking care of retired community is somewhere around 61 cents on a dollar. And that is staggering, and it's going up.
I also wanted to ask you, and again, General, thanks for hanging on here for us. We are waiting to hear out of the White House shortly here as they're holding that off-camera gaggle. Iran holding these annual anti-Israel rallies, displaying missiles, staging these anti-Israel rallies across the country, protesters condemning Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories and chanting death to Israel. You wonder how we're supposed to do business with a country that takes on these views.
No, we can't. And the Iranians, from 1980, when the Islamic State was formed in Iran, after the revolution in 1979 that threw out the Shah, every single year they talk about two major things. One is they're going to drive the great Satan out of the Middle East, the United States. And if they have to kill American soldiers and American officials, they will do that. Number two, and this is every single year they say it, we are going to destroy the state of Israel. Those are their two intermediate objectives to be able to dominate and control the Middle East. And they have been steady about that business ever since. Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip have tens, not hundreds, tens of thousands of rockets and missiles, all from one place and one place only, Iran. Right. And they use those missiles that we have seen throughout the many years. Also, The Iranians are on the move in the Middle East. They have influence and control in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and they toppled the government in Yemen a couple of years ago. This is a regime that is absolutely operating against U.S. national interests and the interests of our allies, and we cannot do any business with them.
Always good to get your perspective on things. Thanks for staying on with us.
Yeah, good talking to you, Sandra.
All right. Well, the White House holding yet another off-camera briefing today, barring cameras from shooting the news conference and banning all live audio coverage until it was over. Among the topics on the table, health care, the latest developments in the Russia investigation. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is now with us with more. What did you learn?
Sandra, good afternoon to you. Didn't learn a whole lot more than we knew earlier this morning, particularly on the issue of health care. I talked with a senior administration official earlier today who said that the White House is actively engaged in trying to bring more senators on board. You know, we have those 4 senators. We have Mike Lee, as well as Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, and Rand Paul, who are all saying that they cannot support the bill in its current form. So the president has been working the phones. He talked to Mitch McConnell. That's one thing we did learn from Sean Spicer this afternoon. And he's willing to work behind the scenes to try to bring amendments and changes to the bill that could get it across the goal line. Now, Sean Spicer did say this afternoon that it's not as much of a heavy lift as the House bill was, simply because you're dealing with 4 to 6 people here as opposed to 20 to 30 people. But earlier today on Fox and Friends, talking with Ainsley Earhart, the president did indicate that he is optimistic about the chances of getting this thing passed. Listen here.
It's a very complicated situation from the standpoint you do something that's good for one group but bad for another. It's a very, very narrow path, but I think we're going to get there. We have 4 very good people that, it's not that they're opposed, they'd like to get certain changes, and we'll see if we can take care of that.
One thing we did learn this afternoon, though, Sandra, is that while the president has said repeatedly he doesn't expect to get one Democratic vote on the health care bill in the Senate, he is talking with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin to see if there is some way to bring him and maybe 1 or 2 other Democrats on board. So even though the president is outwardly pessimistic, behind the scenes, a little bit of optimism, maybe a small glimmer of hope that maybe he could get at least a touch of bipartisanship here. Sandra?
John, is the White House still questioning the legitimacy of Special Counsel Robert Mueller? Was that talked about?
You know, I asked the question at the briefing today with Sean Spicer whether or not the president is of the same mind as he was last week, that he will not take steps to remove Robert Mueller from his position. Sean Spicer said the president's thinking on that hasn't changed. But again, in that interview this morning with Ainsley Earhart of Fox and Friends, the president seemed to indicate that he thinks that Robert Mueller does have potential conflict of interest here. Listen to what the president said.
Well, he's very, very good friends with Comey, which is very bothersome, but he's also, we're going to have to see. I mean, we're going to have to see in terms, look, there has been no obstruction, there has been no collusion, there has been leaking by Comey. I can say that the people that have been hired are all Hillary Clinton supporters. Some of them worked for Hillary Clinton. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous if you want to know the truth from that standpoint. But Robert Mueller's an honorable man, and hopefully he'll come up with an honorable solution.
Subtle suggestion there, Sandra, that maybe there is a case under which Robert Mueller might have to recuse himself from the investigation. And the president clearly concerned about the fact that a lot of Democrats seem to be brought on board to Mueller's team. I talked with the president's outside counsel earlier today because typically questions about the Russia investigation are referred to them. They repeated that they believe, this is the outside legal team, that Robert Mueller is an honorable man and, quote, will do his best. So we'll keep watching this to see where it goes, Sandra.
All right, John Roberts, thanks for the update. Getting swept in special elections this year, some Democrats are calling for Nancy Pelosi to step aside. Let someone else take the helm. Would a new leader do anything to help?